So during our 1 hour session today, where we will talk about the new Digital Inclusion Program Manual, we'll also have time to go through a couple of pieces of the manual. There are some new features that I do want to highlight for you. We will have a panel discussion with some esteemed colleagues of ours from the digital inclusion community. We will have time for a Q&A session at the end, so go ahead and keep your questions coming in the chat or the Q&A. We will monitor both, and we will take those questions at the end around 2:50 or so Eastern time. And then I'll also talk a little bit about other opportunities to engage with NDIA and the digital inclusion community. So first, what I want to do is I want to recognize Maya Wagner, who is the head of digital inclusion, sustainability, and environmental social governance at Dell Technologies. And Dell is a tremendous partner for NDIA and was instrumental in making sure that we could get this manual out to you, our community. And they also provided a lot of feedback and support and contributions to this manual. So with that, I'd like to say hello to Maya and welcome you.
Thank you, Christy. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the webinar today. I'm just going to say a few words because I think the meat of the conversation is going to be much more valuable. But, I'm really thinking about this year's Digital Inclusion Week's theme of mobilizing toward sustainability. And Christy mentioned that I work in our corporate sustainability and ESG organization. So the word sustainability in my world often means something more to do with the planet, the environment, carbon emissions, those kinds of things. But really, in the context of digital inclusion, it's so much more, and it's really critical that we nail this piece now. It's about resiliency, and it encompasses the development of adaptable, durable systems that really equitably serve all individuals. And I just have been thinking about this, resiliency for a number of reasons. The hurricanes that just slammed our southeast recently, and other change that just continues to happen. We really are, maybe we say this every decade, but we really are seeing change at a faster pace than ever before. And I'll be the first one to say AI on this call. We know that AI is transforming the way we work, we socialize, we interact. So it's ever more important that the foundation of digital inclusion in our communities is sustainable. And so I think that really motivated us to support the development of the Digital Inclusion Program Manual. We think that collective action will drive change and progress. And the manual was just one way of hopefully many ways that we can capture learnings from seasoned digital inclusion practitioners and share them with a great group of institutions like yours that are all focused on similar work. So when we think of collective action, it can be really challenging, but are there tools that we can leverage that can really drive that kind of work together? We also really wanted to elevate the voices of some of our key partners that who have learned a lot of hard lessons along the way so that we can accelerate that progress for new and old practitioners alike. So, our hope, like I said, is our hope is that the manual can accelerate your missions to bring technology and connectivity to the communities that need it the most. And, we've yet to see sort of the impact of the manual. But we are really proud of it. We're really proud and grateful to the voices who contributed and super grateful to NDIA for leading the charge on all of this fantastic work. Really excited about the conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya, and thank you again to Dell Technologies. So a few people have come into the room. I'm going to launch a poll. We do anticipate that there's going to be a number of people who are new to the community, and again, welcome. So let us know if you have been in this space for less than a year, in the space meaning digital inclusion, 2 to 5 years, 5 to 10, and 10 plus. So we'll just take a minute just to see that information come through. Great. So it looks like our new faces are leading. Great. Great. So about 35% have been in the digital inclusion space for less than a year. 30% have been in the space for 2 to 5 years, 26% from 5 to 10 years, and 9% 10 or more years. So I do want to recognize those who have been in this space, who have been our leaders, our trailblazers for 10 years or more. Thank you so very much for sticking with us and leading the way. So with that, I'm going to go back to our presentation. Okay, I share the results. Okay. Okay, I'm moving back to our presentation. Okay, so before we jump into the new manual, I want to give a little bit of foundational elements on why we're doing this work and what it means. So digital equity is the condition in which all people in the communities that they are in have the information technology and capacity to fully participate in our society, democracy, and economy. Then digital inclusion are all those activities, all the work that is being done right now to make sure that people in our communities have access and are able to understand and use technology to fully participate in our society. So digital divide is the issue. Digital inclusion is the work, all these activities and everything that the manual is supporting with guidance and tools. And digital equity is the goal. So here's a link to the new Digital Inclusion Program Manual. And we titled it From the Community Doers Who Define the Field for Those Who Do the Work, recognizing again all of you and especially those who have been in the community for a number of years. There's a link right here into the guide as well, and you can also download it as a PDF. I want to highlight a couple of new materials that are in this manual. This is the third iteration of the Digital Inclusion Program Manual. It comes in a couple of different names, but in this new version, we have expanded chapters on research. So what should data collection look like? What are some tools that are available to you? What does community engagement look like? What are some best practices to fully engage and bring your community members to the table? And what are some lessons that we've learned over the past 10, 15 years? We also provide a number of program models for you to consider as you think about what kind of digital inclusion program your community needs and how you want to develop it. You really fleshed out the staffing models and methods because many of the digital inclusion programs have full-time staff, but others are still volunteer run. And so how do we provide guidance to support all those different models to make sure that the community we're serving is getting what it needs to support digital inclusion and digital equity? We also include best practices in space and place usage. So when you're working with partners and looking to expand your role within the community, how can you work with community partners to use their space, to do referrals, to do partnership events, things like that? And this was a big area that Lo Smith, who was formerly with NDIA as a senior program manager, spent a lot of time on. So I do want to recognize that work that they did. I'm also proud to let you know that there's a lot of information on funding and sustainability. It's really critical as all this money is coming down from the government that we ensure that our programs are here for the long term, not just for the amount of time that the funding from federal and state grants will support the work. And I'm also proud to let you know there's a number of resources and tools around evaluating your program. So what is quantitative data? What is qualitative data? How do you tell your story? Things like that. And then for a snapshot of resources, when you open up the manual, there's a call out box that has 4 major questions to guide you as you think about this work. So why do you want to do it? Who do you want to serve? What program impact do you want to get out of it? And how does doing this work align with the mission and vision of your organization? So how will it be embedded within that work? There's also at the end a really cool digital inclusion program manual checklist to help you walk through all the different components and pieces. A couple other areas I want to highlight is we talk about digital equality versus digital equity, and we explain why we are moving to encourage digital equity, not equality. We want to make sure we're meeting people where they are, not where we think they need to be, or where we think we need to support them, but actually what they need. There's also a little bit of information on the differences between digital literacy versus digital skilling. We at NDIA use digital skilling. There's an explanation of why. There's also a reference to a variety of tools that our team has created around asset mapping. And there's a lot of free templates for you that are linked within the guide itself. But how do you do that and what does it look like? There's another thing that I want to address too, and one of our panelists will talk about this during her portion, but it is a spectrum of community engagement. So as you're working with your community members, how do you work with them and reach out and get the information and their feedback and create a feedback loop? So as you create or evolve your program, you're making sure to consider the community members you're serving and their needs and what they need and why. And then how does your digital inclusion program, whether it's new or being established right now, fit within the digital inclusion ecosystem? And we have a whole definition and resources around that. And then there's a plethora of resources around selecting your area of focus. Some digital inclusion programs focus on one or all four of the key areas of digital inclusion barriers, which could include connectivity and access to devices and the internet, and then digital skilling and technical support. So in sum, what to expect inside if you haven't already read it. And if you have, I'd love for you to just share your experience with it within the chat for those who may have not had a chance to read it, since we are promoting this during Digital Inclusion Week 2024, and there's a lot of new faces. But again, it has best practices for developing a community digital inclusion program, a variety of recommendations and examples for different program models and techniques. There is no one size fits all here. And there's a lot of guidance to support you in best creating that within your community needs. And then there's guidance for creating a sustainable program through focused and thoughtful strategies for community engagement, evaluation, and how to form strategic partnerships and alliances. I would like to also take a moment to do a huge thank you to our working group who contributed tremendously to the development of this manual. And I have their names here. I know some are in the room, but I'll just want to say their names. Candice Browdy, Melanie Coletti, Vishnu Desai, Robert Gagne, Rebecca Coma, Dr. Young Mao Kim, Andrea Lindsay, Lindsay McQuistion, Maya Pitts III, Jess Ross, and Magdalena Witzenzeller. So thank you very much for all your work on that. And NDIA takes great pride in making sure that anything we create is developed by the field and for the field. So if you are an Affiliate Plus member, you would have access to participate in all of our working groups. And I will have a reference to how to do that at the end of the call today. One other thing to know, everything we create is open source and available to you under Creative Commons. The only thing we ask is full credit must be given to NDIA as the creator, and you cannot use any of our materials for commercial gain. So that's one thing I just want to call out for you. And everything is on our website, and there's a whole link to Creative Commons if you have any questions about that. So with that, I am delighted to introduce the rest of our panelists for our time together today. You got to meet Maya from Dell Technologies, but I would next like to introduce Rebecca Kauma, who's the Director of Digital Equity with the Internal Services Department at the County of Los Angeles, and Melanie Coletti, who's the Digital Equity Manager for the Office of the Future of Work at the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. Both Rebecca and Melanie were key members of the working group to create this manual, so I do want to thank you for that. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back to all of your faces. Just move it to my computer. Okay. So now I'm going to begin our Q&A portion of the call. And what I'm really excited about is I want you all to get to hear from our community leaders from across the country on why they got involved in this work and a little bit about their work. And we will be a little bit brief on that, but I'm sure they would be happy to share their contact information with you should you request it. So with that, I'm going to go to you, Maya, first and ask you, why are you involved in digital inclusion? Why did you choose this work?
There we go. I'm on mute. So digital inclusion for me, and if I think about sort of my career, I dabbled in lots of different types of community development, but what always stood out to me were some of these cross-cutting issues, and digital inclusion to me is the foundation of sort of community progress and success. And so if we can really move the needle from this area, then we know that, I mean, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but we know that, sort of well-being, economic opportunity, educational outcomes will be improved when there is access to the technology and the skills needed to use that tech, when that's equitably allocated and available. And so, that motivates me to do the work. I right now I sit, I sit on the corporate side. And so I think my work focuses on thinking how that plays out on a global level. So, we do a lot of great work with NDIA, but we are a global company. We bring this work to all sorts of different pockets of the world. And what I think is exciting is that I know that a company like Dell has a place in this space, both from sort of the philanthropy, social impact side and from our business side. But it's about understanding how can we create a global strategy that is also able to be implemented in regional with regional nuance and community specific nuance. So that kind of excites me because again, I think that is important that there's somebody who can unite those different sort of global and local needs. And right now, again, just a quick AI plug. Dell's strategy right now is to accelerate the adoption of AI, and I think that I love that because it really helps me make the case for digital inclusion internally. Because if we can't make sure that we have more and more inclusive access to the technology, then we won't have the successful AI outcomes that the company is driving for. So I think that the company strategy very much helps sort of our ESG strategy to keep digital inclusion a humongous priority and make sure that we can make lasting change in this space.
Thank you, Maya. So same question for you, Rebecca.
Yes, thank you so much, Christy. Happy Digital Inclusion Week, everyone. My name is Rebecca Kaluma, and I'm the first ever Director of Digital Equity for the most populous county in the nation, also known as the County of Los Angeles. And for me, this work is very much personal. So my personal mission is to uplift and empower communities that are most in need. And the work that I do strategically focuses on making sure that we're deploying equitable and inclusive and culturally relevant programs, and most importantly, systems change efforts. And for me, as a woman of color and as a Black woman, I personally understand those barriers and challenges that communities who are impacted by the digital divide face. For me, I am Ugandan American. I'm also Nigerian through marriage, and I grew up low income. So it's important for me that holds a position of power in the county to ensure that we're working closely with our cross-sector trusted partners, members of the community, to ensure that we're able to address the digital divide through collective action. And most importantly, I would say is I truly understand the value and the importance of ensuring that all communities are connected, because this work crosses all different issue areas, whether it's healthcare, education, workforce development, and we truly need to ensure that all of our communities are connected so that way they have a thriving, full quality of life.
Thank you, Rebecca. Question the same for you, Melanie. And you're muted.
I love when I do that. I found my passion for digital inclusion working at Denver Public Library. I was there for about 17 years. And after I finished library school with big plans to sit behind a reference desk and recommend books to people, I ended up actually in the biggest computer lab in the state. And instead I was helping people, often folks in crisis, navigate housing applications and LEAP applications and filling out job applications and all the things that all of us do online all the time. And that's when it became really evident to me that even though it seemed like everyone on the planet was able to use phones and computers and had great internet connections and things, that wasn't actually the case. And so that took me down my path. And when I decided to step away from public service, I landed at the state. And I am also the first of my kind, first digital equity manager at the state of Colorado. And we are housed in the Office of the Future of Work, but obviously this work is way more far reaching than simply workforce. That is something that we think is important, but also, you know, as Rebecca said, it touches every aspect of everyone's lives.
Thank you, Melanie. So the next question is for Maya. Why did Dell want to support this work, and what do you hope people will get out of this manual? We spent a good amount of time working on it with our working group, and then there were also a number of digital inclusion programs that Dell supports from across the country who also contributed their expertise. So what would you like to share about that?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that, you know, Dell is a global company and we our presence is all over the place, which is great. And what is again, what's good scale, but we you know, it becomes challenging to really understand communities and what their specific and unique needs are. And I think what the reality is that we actually don't we have a place to play where we can support communities in their digital transformation without by empowering them to do so, right? Without having the answers. And I think it's okay for us to say that, right? I don't think we always want to say that we don't have the answers, but it's important that we say, hey, we don't know what's going on in your community. We can't pretend to know that because we're not on the ground. And so one of the reasons why we really wanted to support this manual was because we really think that by empowering the community leaders like Rebecca and Melanie on the line here, we can say, hey, look, here are tools, but we're going to take a step back. Let us know how we can accelerate what you want to do. Are there additional tools that that we can offer? But we aren't going to influence the way you use those tools to do the work that you need to do. And so again, I think that's why we really wanted to support this, is because we saw it as a tool, again, sort of with NDIA's big network, really being able to get this tool out to the affiliates that are driving digital inclusion work. We thought this is a way that we could really sort of enable the communities to drive that local development, innovation, sort of wherever you are in your digital inclusion journey. And so I think what I want people and organizations to take away from this tool is that you can customize your program based on your community and what those needs are with a tool like this and with a network like what NDIA has to offer. And that's what we really wanted to bring out in the manual was, you might not need all the pages in it, and maybe you've already been an implementer for 10 plus years. There's still something for you to learn from this sort of wealth of knowledge. And so you can take it and customize what's appropriate for your community. So I hope if there's one thing, it's customize away.
Excellent. That's a great lead into making sure that the work that we do is reflective of the community. So my question next is for Rebecca. How can digital equity practitioners uplift the community's lived experiences? And what do we mean by that? And ensure that they have voice, power, and ownership in digital equity programming, that it's not at them, but it's with them. How do we do that?
Yes, thank you so much, Christy. And since we're referencing this amazing toolkit and manual, I encourage everyone to turn to page 29 of the manual, because I do want to reference the spectrum of community engagement. And for me, this has been my bread and butter anytime I need to engage with community. And the reason why I love this approach so much is because it's equity driven, and it ultimately allows us to be able to strengthen and transform relationships with community, especially those community members that are historically marginalized and oppressed. And ultimately, it allows them to be engaged as part of government and organization decision making. So since all of you guys are all turned to the spectrum of community engagement, and again, that is on page 29, I do want to mention that there is obviously a spectrum. So the lowest spectrum is inform and the highest is to empower. And I do want to mention that we should be operating on the empower side of the spectrum. And for me, when I look at community engagement, it's about uplifting the community's lived experiences, expertise, and wisdom. And I think oftentimes in any type of field, we are considered the subject matter experts, but it's important for us to continue to uplift the community who are also seen as experts because they're the ones that are having to navigate the digital divide. And we must ensure that utilizing the spectrum that we are not allowing the loudest voice in digital equity to be shining a light on what needs to be centered on, but most importantly, that we're representing the entire community. So when I typically talk about community engagement, I like to uplift the fact that it must be a two-way dialogue. My biggest pet peeve is when I go into government meetings and the government is talking at the community and not listening to them and allowing them to create a space where they can share their lived experiences and expertise. And I really do encourage all of us here, every single digital equity practitioner that is here in this space, to ensure that they're utilizing the spectrum so that way they're able to effectively engage with those communities that are most impacted by the digital divide. And I would say by looking at this spectrum, we are ultimately ensuring that communities are participating in a community-driven decision-making process. And our end result ultimately is to ensure that they have community collective power and that the work that we're trying to do is transformative as well. And utilizing this spectrum is a form of systems change. And I know we utilize that buzzword a lot, but to make it very clear, systems change does include there being an equitable distribution of decision-making power and authority that is being given back to communities. So literally by utilizing this framework, we are shifting the power and addressing the inequitable power dynamics. So I encourage you all to continue to utilize the spectrum of community engagement anytime you need to engage community. And the one thing that I want to mention as well as you guys are looking at that spectrum on page 29 is that obviously in some cases we cannot always be on the empower side. So I encourage everyone, even if you're not able to operate on the empower side, to still set expectations and communicating what is the level of participation. So if you're just there to inform community about something, then specify that and state that and make sure that it's clear, because oftentimes when we're trying to engage with community, whether it's digital equity related or not, they get upset when we're telling them we're here to empower you, but when we're having the conversation and engaging them, our intent was to inform. So highly encourage you guys to utilize the spectrum of community engagement. And as we already know, many of us are in the process of anxiously waiting for our plans and funding to be implemented with the federal funding as part of the Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program. So as you guys are receiving the funding over the next few months, I encourage you all to utilize the spectrum of community engagement to continue to engage community and allowing them to be incorporated in the solutions that will be deployed as part of that effort.
Thank you, Rebecca. So many great resources and information in the spectrum. So thank you for making sure that we include it in the manual. I think a lot of you will find a tremendous amount of information and guidance in that. And I want to say too that even though we're doing this webinar right now during Digital Inclusion Week, we are still available to you throughout the year, post Digital Inclusion Week, to provide any guidance or support or answer any questions you may have as you work to use the manual. So with that, from community engagement to partnerships. So Melanie, why are partnerships important to this work that we're doing with digital inclusion, and how can they be leveraged?
Yeah, I think, just this morning I was actually in Denver. Denver has the only digital inclusion coalition in the state of Colorado, and they have their own digital equity plan written up. And even though they're really going for it, it's like all of us, I think, need to be working with others in order to achieve our goals. There is no way that individual organizations or governments can just go off and tackle digital inclusion on their own. There's a lot of inefficiency in that, and there's a lot of sort of consequences of working with others that I think are really important to recognize. And some of those are, for example, in our case, it's how we built trust with people on the ground. So everybody on our team just happened to have come from public service in the past, and we knew that if we just posted like an online survey for the state, that we were not going to get the right information. So we did post an online survey, but we posted it in 19 languages, and we paid community-based organizations to help people complete the surveys. And that way people could go to locations that they already trusted, where they already saw familiar faces, where people spoke the language that they spoke, and they could get some support to really be able to share. Like Rebecca said, you don't want to like tell people what to do. You want to hear from them, right? And so in order to hear from the people who are not ever heard, you have to make some adjustments to what's easy. You know, the easy solution, the fast solution isn't always the best one. So our partnerships kind of evolved out of that work. And we have several organizations now who the people who are in the first listening sessions were kind of like, the state wants to know what? I don't know if I want to talk to the state. What are you going to do with this information? And then when it came time, and after they had experienced it, we asked for feedback on our during our public comment period, and people stepped up again, wanted to provide information. So that was really cool to hear. I think, you know, bringing people together in collaborations and working in groups allows us to honor, you know, people who might be doing things differently than us. It also, you know, is a good way to ramp up advocacy in a space where I think, for example, broadband is getting a lot of attention and a lot more funding than we are. And yes, broadband is vital and important to so many people. It's part of the digital inclusion equation. And, you know, we need to speak loudly in these spaces, because I think the connection is still not being made between just having internet is not going to solve the problem. Like the rest of us have to also make sure we're supporting people with their skills and their you know, getting their devices and all of that. So it's something that we can't do in our own bubbles. We need to be working across all kinds of lines, that imaginary lines that have been created.
Thank you, Melanie. That's really impressive. 19 languages. I want to let that sink in for a minute. And I want to do just a call out. I saw in the chat we have somebody joining us from Somalia. So welcome. And I would love to hear in the chat, if you are able, how did you hear about us and how did you learn about this webinar? And thank you for joining. So the next question is for Rebecca. And what are some best practices that digital inclusion practitioners could pull from the manual? We talked about one key piece, but you've been in this space for a while and done a lot of work throughout your area in California, Long Beach, and Los Angeles. So we'd love to hear some more.
Absolutely. Thank you. So again, I'm going to defer back to the manual on page 14, where it talks about equality versus equity. And I know Christy already provided us with some high-level overview in terms of what the difference is between both of those words, because again, both of them are buzzwords and they're both used a lot, but they mean completely separate things. And one of the best practices that I would encourage all of us to utilize, especially those of us that are embarking on digital equity efforts for the first time, is to utilize an equity lens. And I encourage everyone to use an equity lens in all phases of their digital equity programming. So that would include the planning, development, implementation, and evaluation. And I always like to remind everyone that there's a difference between equity. We utilize equity both as an outcome and as a process that both guides our actions and our decisions. And I would say all of us are naturally striving for digital equity as digital equity practitioners, and that is our goal. Many of those of us have digital equity within our titles. I do. But it's important for us to also note that we can still be striving for digital equity. However, if you're not utilizing digital equity as a process, you can still have unintended consequences and even cause potential community harm. So when I look at community engagement and also utilizing equity in that space as well, it uplifts a process that allows us to be intentional and inclusive and thoughtful in our digital inclusion programming. And I would say when we're looking at an equity lens, it's important for us to continue to promote fairness and justice as we're looking at our digital inclusion programming. And most importantly, making sure that we're prioritizing communities that are most in need of the digital inclusion resources and services that we want to deploy as well. One thing that I want to mention as we're utilizing an equity lens in our work is we should not be taking a one-size-fits-all approach. During my time in Long Beach, I learned very quickly that every community is different. So the needs of one community may be different from the needs of the other community. And it's important for us to continue to work with trusted community partners that can educate us on that cultural relevance and understanding to ensure that the community strategies that we're deploying will ultimately meet those needs of the community. And so some people may be asking, how do I apply an equity lens to the work? And I'm happy to share additional materials if people are interested in connecting after the webinar, but I will go ahead and just share some high-level questions that every digital equity practitioner should reflect and ask when they're applying an equity lens to their work. So some of those questions include, what are the unintended outcomes and results for the communities with the digital inclusion program? What communities would be burdened or benefit from the digital inclusion program? Has quantitative and qualitative data been disaggregated by key equity indicators to understand what communities are most in need of the digital inclusion program? How can we modify the digital inclusion program to enhance positive impacts and reduce negative impacts? How will the digital inclusion program be documented and evaluated? So utilizing these questions should be done at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. And these are conversations that we should always be having to ensure that we have equitable outcomes with the digital inclusion programs that we're doing. So again, feel free to reference equity versus equality on page 14 of the manual, and happy to share any additional resources on how we can continue to apply an equity lens with our digital inclusion programming efforts.
Thank you, Rebecca. That will definitely help support our communities and also bring more partners to the table that are not always there. So thank you for that. So to switch now from looking at a local perspective, I want to go to the state. So Melanie, as someone who works for the state of Colorado, how are you all addressing digital inclusion barriers in communities from a, kind of bird's eye view approach?
Yeah, so I just put in the chat, this is from the section in the manual called Sustaining the Movement. And we are talking about sustainability this week during Digital Inclusion Week. But this is something that's on our minds a lot because, yes, we are receiving historical amounts of funding for digital equity. And in our case, in Colorado, we know that it is not enough funding to just, stand up new programs or support programs that are already existing, at least not with this first round of funding. We're a little behind the curve as far as funding for digital inclusion goes in Colorado. And so our plan is to build on the work of lots of people who have been in this space for a long, long time and build a digital inclusion ecosystem. What that looks like for us is to stand up coalitions in communities. And as Rebecca said, we want people to decide what they want to do. And we want to give voice to people who maybe haven't had a voice in these spaces. So to do that, we are actually first hiring fiscal sponsors. And we've come up with a formula based on covered populations and not by the number of people in a county or in an economic development region, but on the percentage of covered populations that live there. And this way, under-resourced parts of the state will be assured of getting at least enough funding to build their coalition. And that will allow us to have, regular communication with coalitions so that people can voice what's actually happening in their communities. It'll allow us through fiscal sponsors to make sure that it's easy for them to manage these federal funds. Anybody, I don't know if people on this call applied for any of the competitive funds, but that application was a bear, and the monitoring and the reporting is also going to be a bear. We've been doing that work with the planning funds and other things too, right? It's hard. And so we want to lift some of the burden off of communities and allow them to speak and to identify their needs. And then we can follow behind that, look at their digital access plans, and help figure out how to fund the programs that they think will make the most impact in their spaces. So that is, at least for our first round, just building that ecosystem, building communities of practice so people can share what they've learned and what's failed and what's worked well. Colorado, like many other states, has really diverse little pockets of people. We have very rural areas and mountain areas. We have a lot of frontier areas, believe it or not, with very low populations. And then we have this chunk of really dense urban population in the middle of the state. And there are long held beliefs that the city gets all the money and the rural areas don't. And so, we're trying to level the playing field a little bit, in that we are not just, just to give you an idea, like Denver might get, say around $150,000, while some county in rural Colorado might get the same, based on the percentage of covered population. And that way, an urban center that has more nearby resources, whether or not people have good access to them is another question. But, they are there, whereas someone in a rural area may have to drive. We had people say that they were driving to Texas for healthcare because it was closer than driving to Denver, because they're in the far southeast corner of the state. So, just getting on the ground and talking to people and learning what their experiences have been have really informed how we decided to roll this funding out.
Thank you, Melanie. If you have any links from the state website to share around that, we'd love to have it within the chat. So my next question is for Maya around, I talked at the top of the hour, the barriers to digital inclusion with devices, access to the internet, and digital skilling. And Dell Technologies has a cool thing to help us practitioners with devices. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, so one of the when it comes to device sort of selection, the manual goes into thinking, coming up with a strategy that really meets your community and the needs of the program that you're building, where it's at. And that's what Dell wants to do as well, right? So whether you're working with like my team on a digital inclusion program, or whether you're a customer or whether you have other connections to Dell, we have the services and the technical expertise to help you think through how can those needs be best met. And in the manual I'm going to pull a Rebecca, I think it's page 63, you can see some of the ways that we outline that. So we have an entire pro bono portfolio that would be available to any nonprofit organization, where you can spend 2 days with Dell team members on a specific project. And maybe your project is, as a part of your digital inclusion program, you really want to understand how can you survey the tech needs of your community, for example. So our team members could help you think through that, and then again, kind of offer their technical expertise on how to select the right devices. And then not only select the right devices, but select the holistic plan for what happens when those devices are no longer usable, and you want to take some of that value and use it to purchase additional devices in the future. So I just want to make that plug to think of Dell for all we have to offer, which is technical expertise, along with what we are what we have commercially available. I will plug that on the landing page of the program manual, you'll see a discount code for anybody. You actually don't need to be a nonprofit. You can click on that and you can get a small discount off of your devices. You know, other hardware companies are often, including Dell, we are you know, interested in working with you. And so if there are sort of larger volumes, and if there is a social purpose at the end of that, we can consider negotiating certain rates. So again, I think about specifically what you're looking for whom you're looking for them, and then what's that volume, and then is the volume going to be something that might help you get a more accessible rate. And so I'm trying to blanket what many other companies might do, and I can't speak to some of the other companies, but at least from a Dell perspective, that's kind of how we approach it. And I think that maybe I'll plug the discount code in the chat if it hasn't already been up there. Oh yeah, and then yeah, check it out. We think it's hopefully can help a couple folks out.
Thank you, Maya. So we're going to open it up to some questions. We've gotten a couple of questions that have come through, and I do request that you put those questions in the chat, and we'll go through them and answer them as we have time. And if we are unable to, we can email you directly the response to your question. But one question I can answer, it was about, does the manual contain strategies for using learning approaches and teaching digital skilling to different populations, such as older adults, learners who are not native speakers of English? And there is a variety of resources that are referenced in the manual from our community members whose organizations create a variety of curriculum around digital skilling for a variety of covered populations and other populations. So you can definitely go through the manual and find some resources that best fit those needs. If you're looking for something specific that you don't know is going to be addressed in that manual after you've looked at the list of resources, feel free to email me directly and I'll make sure to connect you with one of our community members who is doing that work. So with that, I'd like to have some closing thoughts from our esteemed panelists, things that we may have missed or something that you'd like to address as you have many members of our community in this webinar this afternoon. So I'll go with you, Rebecca. Any final thoughts to share?
Yes, thank you so much, Christy. I would encourage every single digital equity practitioner to utilize the manual. I know we had a variety of different years of experience that were shared by our various attendees today. And even for me, I've been in the field for more than 5 years now, so I would consider myself an expert by now. But I would encourage everyone, whether you've been in this field for 20 plus years or you're just embarking on a new journey within this year, still take advantage of the manual. I have found that there's a lot of best practices that even someone like me that's been in the field for quite some time can still utilize. And I would say there's always room for opportunity and improvement to be able to strengthen our programs and to learn from the best practices and wisdom that all of our colleagues have shared that got us to this process and to this document. So please take advantage of it. And also sharing is caring. So if you know other people that aren't here today, feel free to share it with them as well. And again, as we're embarking on this historic journey of implementing the Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program funding, definitely utilize this manual to be able to strengthen your programs for implementation as well. There's a handy checklist in there, and literally every single type of digital inclusion activity that you can think of is outlined there with best practices and resources. So definitely take advantage of it and utilize it to help strengthen the great work that you're already doing.
Thank you, Rebecca. Melanie, I know you're not able to be on video, but any final thoughts to share?
Yeah, I second everything Rebecca said. I think all of us have our own experiences and understand things that we've observed and interpreted. And I think it's important that, that we all come together in these types of spaces as often as possible to just ensure that, we're not missing anything. Digital inclusion is something that is impacting every part of a person's life. anymore. And I think it's very easy to miss things. And I know, as a team in Colorado, we've missed some things along the way as well. The important thing, though, is to think about how things maybe didn't go the way that you expected and do better. We're really advocating for language access, not just in our own team and the work that we're doing around digital inclusion, but for the state as a whole. And I think, making sure that you speak up, take your time, and understand that, things aren't always going to go right in the first go necessarily, but keep at it. It's easy to get discouraged, I think. And these spaces provide that camaraderie and that, kind of safe bubble where we can all sort of vent and also share our successes. So
Thank
thanks.
you, Melanie.
I'm glad we're all here together.
I am too. Maya, final thoughts to share.
Yeah, well, these wonderful ladies stole the words right off of my Word document. But, I think one of my biggest messages was what Rebecca landed on, which is, I think we really need to share the manual. So I think one of the beauties of partnering with NDIA is that you're making all this knowledge openly available. And so we can all help bring that knowledge to other people who I speak to individuals who are working on different community programs, not even realizing that it is part of this bigger effort of digital inclusion. So I think the more we can use these tools and these resources to make this network bigger, the bigger impact we can have with sort of our collective action. And, at Dell, we really do believe technology can be harnessed to drive human progress. So this manual, this network, your actions are ensuring that the technology is in the hands of people who are actually driving progress. And so our hope is that, that these tools can continue to do that for those who need it most.
Thank you, Maya.
Thank you.
So in the final few minutes, I want to just share a couple of other resources that NDIA has for you. Okay, so there are a number of you who are new to our community joining the webinar today. So here is a slide that has information on how to join NDIA as a friend or an affiliate plus or a corporate supporter. And becoming an affiliate gets you access to our listserv, which has a variety of resources and tools and is our community of practice, our monthly community calls, our monthly newsletter. So please go ahead and check that out if you have not already. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, it is Digital Inclusion Week, and we are so thrilled to have this webinar during our week. It will be until Friday. And this year, we do expect to top the number of organizations and events that occurred and to break all records that we had over the past couple of years. And again, the theme is Stronger Together, Mobilizing Towards Sustainability. And I do believe that this manual helps support that, that theme. And the last thing I wanted to share with you is information on our annual event, which we call Net Inclusion. It will be happening in May 2025 in the Gila River Indian community, which is about 30 minutes from the Phoenix airport. Early bird registration is still open. It will end on November 5th. We'd love to meet you in person. We'd love to have you part of our community. And if you've already been to a Net Inclusion, we'd love to see you again and welcome you back. So with that, I want to make sure that you have that information as well. And I know my colleagues will be dropping information about Net Inclusion with the registration link in the chat. So the last thing I want to say is my team, Team NDIA, has been on this call as well. So I do want to thank Davida and Abby and Vicky and Pamela for supporting this webinar and doing a lot of the behind the scenes work. I also want to give a huge, huge thank you to Dell Technologies, to Maya Wagner, and to members of the working group who created this manual, Rebecca and Melanie, and all the others who were not on the panel but contributed tremendously to this work. So with that, thank you so very much for joining the call this afternoon. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email us. Like I said, this webinar is being recorded, so we will send out a recording, I would say, by the end of tomorrow, close of business Eastern time. And I don't see any last questions in the chat. So with that, I'm going to wish you an excellent and happy Digital Inclusion Week. And thank you so very much for joining us this afternoon. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.